Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for attending this session on burnout. To get us started, I would like for you to pull up your chat and ask everyone to answer this question. How many years have you been working in education? Awesome. So I'm seeing everything from 3 to over 20. Amazing. All right. Well, 2 to 20. Impressive. Absolutely amazing. And my next question in the chat is, why does the topic of burnout interest you? And seeing that will help me understand what motivated you to choose this session. Help other people. You're seeing it in your colleagues. You're worried that this is going to happen to you. You're feeling it. You want more tools. Some of you are feeling like acutely burned out. So I'm seeing a wide range, wanting to challenge yourself. Okay, awesome. So the reason why teacher burnout really interests me is because I think it's uniquely correlated with childhood depression. And to ground our conversation, I want to share 2 key statistics. So one on students and one on teachers. So if you look at this graph, it starts at around 2008, which is when I started teaching. And in that time frame, the rate of depression has stayed steady for adults. So if you look at the bottom 2 lines, but it's risen consistently in our middle schoolers, high schoolers, and young adults. And we know since the pandemic that this trend has been exacerbated by isolation and lack of contact in schools. Meanwhile, when you look at our teaching population, for every 10 teachers who starts working in our profession, 50% of them quit within the first 5 years. And then of that 50%, only some of them are highly engaged. And so to frame this problem, student depression and anxiety are continuing to rise in our kids. And relatedly, adults are exhibiting burnout symptoms, which we can think of as contagious workplace depression. My name is Julia Poole, and this is a picture of me and my class in 2008 when I started teaching in Gary, Indiana. And after my 5th year, I won DC Teacher of the Year and got to visit the Obama White House. And I was really young compared to my colleagues in my Teacher of the Year class. And I remember the day that I won, I of course was extremely grateful to my students and my parents. But I also thanked my former assistant principal and my first co-teacher, Ann Burgard. And, I credited them for my success as an educator because we collaborated every day with each other at work, but especially informally. So this is a picture of us at a bar talking about teaching. And I said back then, and I think it back now, that most of what I learned as an educator came from watching other educators that I really admired and copying them. And this might resonate with some of you. And research suggests that informal collaboration is the #1 way that many high performers improve. And maybe one of the best parts about winning Teacher of the Year for me was the chance to informally collaborate with incredible educators and see up close, what is it like to stay in this profession for a really long time? And you might recognize some of these faces from the InStoy community. We have Sarah Brown Westling, who's a toy from Iowa with 25 years of experience. Justin Minkle, a Teacher of the Year from Arkansas with 20 years of experience. Josh Parker, who I know is keynoting later today from Maryland, 20-year veteran Leanne Stevens of Minnesota, 25 years, Marguerite Izzo from New York, 30 years, and Danielle Massey, who's over 15-year veteran. And you might follow some of these educators online and collaborate with them informally yourself. After teaching for a few more years, I got involved in school leadership, and I did a turnaround school in Washington, DC. And there, I was yet again surrounded by exceptional educators, and I was also confronted with more childhood depression, anxiety, and even childhood suicidality than I had ever been exposed to before. And some of these experiences led me to wonder two things. What keeps some teachers from burning out? And how can teachers who are not clinicians address our student mental health crisis? And I wanted to think about these questions and study them, which led me to study positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. And I'll define later in this presentation what positive psychology is. But what I found in my research is that one of the best ways to address childhood depression is to address teacher burnout. So I want to ask another question in the chat, which is like, what does burnout sound like for you? And burnout is defined in academia as moments of exhaustion, low self-efficacy, and cynicism. And while you're putting that into the chat, I'll define each of these. So emotional exhaustion is not having enough energy for the people or things that you want to, being more easily triggered by negative stimulus. Low self-efficacy is the belief that it can be done, but not by you. And then cynicism is the belief that the future is bad and you don't have any control. I love this. No, you cannot go to the bathroom again. That's emotional exhaustion. Yeah, waking up and just dreading your day. I would call that cynicism. Always being tired mentally, not having joy, nothing left to give your family. Yeah. Want to retire every day. So I'm seeing both the presence of the negative, right, being drained, and then the absence of the positive, which would be like our example of joylessness. Thank you for sharing all of that. Yes, carrying the same test, ready to be graded for weeks. Yes. Okay. So sometimes when we experience moments of burnout, that thought or experience is then followed by this feeling of I'm weak, or this means I'm a failure, or I'm not good enough if this is, if I have all of those papers still in my backpack. I don't care enough, or, it's looking around and being like, everybody else seems okay. I shouldn't be struggling this much. And because burnout is so prevalent, right? We see it in the chat, it in your lived experience. One of the questions I was really interested in is, what keeps people like you, like the teachers on this chart, from burning out? And so while I was at Penn, I studied the mindsets of teachers like Josh, Sarah, and Danielle. And one of my key findings was that expert teachers, including veteran award-winning teachers, experience burnout on a daily basis. And so none of us is immune to these symptoms. And to be clear, I want to say that just because you stay in education doesn't mean that you're good. And just because you're good doesn't mean that you stay. Right? And so on this graph, you can see how the orange line represents educators who continue to work in this field year after year and continue to build skill. And a lot of us slid down that during the pandemic, right? And had to relearn all these new skills. And then there's a large subset of us who become proficient and then we're surviving. And then, of course, 50% of us quit within the first 5 years and leave the profession altogether. And today, what we're going to be talking about is what do we know about people on that orange line? And one of the things that I found in my research is that experienced experts have moments of burnout every day. So the symptoms that are listed on the left side of your screen, but they also intentionally cultivated the opposite so that they had optimism, energy, and high self-efficacy. And a lot of programs, when you're thinking about burnout, think about how do we decrease the negative symptoms. And a lot of research on burnout is looking at what are the causes. And my training in positive psychology has been, what is it that allows people to thrive, and what can we be cultivating to support that? And this all led me to start a company called Burn In Mindset that provides burnout prevention coaching so that schools can help their top teachers burn in and not out. And promoting teacher well-being is something that is gaining additional momentum now, especially because of the rise in student depression over the last decade. And of course, the pandemic has exacerbated this. And luckily, there's been an increase in federal funding to support teacher well-being in service of student well-being. And so here's what we can expect for today. So during this session, I'm going to do a crash course on what we refer to as a burn-in mindset. We'll name some common burnout symptoms. And then I'm going to go over a strategy that is research-backed to cultivate the opposite. And I just want to name that because my training focuses on individual psychological strengths, we're going to focus on aspects of burnout that you can address sort of internally on your own personal level. But that said, what allows us to stay in this profession is multifaceted. And I want to clearly name that life and teaching is complicated and full of injustice. And so focusing on individual traits is not an excuse to ignore structural inequity, racism, oppression, poverty, trauma, or pandemics. And so throughout this session, I'm going to share some content. I'm also going to be using the chat to give you a chance to provide your own experience so that you can be learning from each other as well. And keeping in mind that the psych research really supports this idea that prioritizing your well-being is good for you, but it is also good for the teachers and the students that are watching you. So let's go through each symptom of burnout. So a cynical thought that I commonly hear from teachers is, what's the point of investing in this initiative? They're just going to change it anyway. And when I'm working with teachers on this, for example, I was working with a teacher who needed support with the constantly changing initiatives in her school. To help her avoid burnout, we started thinking about how can she intentionally cultivate her resilience. And when I work with clients on resilience, I often reference the research from University of Pennsylvania's work with the US Army. And I think it's relevant because soldiers, like teachers, have to be really resilient. And this is a picture of my brother in Iraq. He earned a Purple Heart during his tour, and he manages symptoms of PTSD since his injury. And some of you might know this statistic or be personally touched by it. But there's 22 soldiers who commit suicide every day on American soil. So there's a huge need to equip soldiers with psychological tools to cope both before, during, and after war. And one approach to studying that problem is to look at what are the causes and symptoms of PTSD. But another approach is to look at what are the trends and common mindsets that support resilience. And Penn's research has identified 6 sub-skills that I'm going to share right now. And when you think of the word resilience, it can be three things. So it can be bouncing back from small things like a missed email, right? It can be tolerating things that aren't going to go away, like a grueling schedule as a teacher, or a newborn that cries in the evenings, or a challenging principal, or a kid who incessantly asks to go to the bathroom, or a principal that the pandemic, right? And then a third scenario that requires resilience is overcoming huge adversity like violence, sudden death, divorce. And so I want you to take 3 minutes to read through these sub-skills and put into the chat, what is something that you've had to be resilient about, and what sub-skill did you use? And my client, one of my clients, she had to use resilience in her school when it went from virtual to hybrid and then in person, and mental agility is really what she focused on cultivating. And share with us like what is it that required your resilience, and then also what was the sub-skill that you used? We can put an example of that into the chat. Feelings of inadequacy and then taking on a new challenge and getting board certified. These are great. So having to adapt curriculum and using your self-efficacy. Yeah, things that are out of your control. Like challenging parents, the school board, the pandemic, and using optimism. Good. Shayla's talking about connection. Yeah, so I think Rebecca's example is of self-awareness, right? Like naming what is happening both for you and for your staff. And that is oftentimes the first step to then using one of these additional skills. These are so varied, such good examples. Yeah, having to rewrite an IEP over and over again and using mental agility to do that. Journaling and reflection, so that might be self-awareness and mental agility. Good. Wonderful. Okay, good. So I'm hearing some things about like prompting doubt, which is another symptom of burnout that we're going to talk about. All right, I'm going to move us on, but this is such a phenomenal list. And you guys are like, ask the question and a second later, you could answer it. Pretty amazing, but not surprising. So let's look at a second symptom of burnout, which is emotional exhaustion. So an emotionally exhausted comment that I get from clients all the time is, I just can't. I'm done. I can't anymore. And you know, a teacher that I work with needed support with being online all day during the pandemic. And in order for her to sort of avoid burnout, she needed to intentionally cultivate energy. And when I work with clients on their energy level, I often reference the research on savoring. And savoring is what you do when you're eating a bowl of ice cream and it's the last bite and you stop to really enjoy it. And so a question that I often ask teachers is, what gives you energy? And when I asked that question to Jen, she said laughing when kids say ridiculous things. And so let's watch a video of how she savored a hilarious moment from one of her third grade students.
her little koala bear class pet on the ground. She goes, "Oh, he died!" And she picks him up and starts floating him in the air and going, "In the arms of the angels." And I was dying. What the heck?
And Jen said that that moment, like, literally kept her going. So this was a post that she did in response to having a really hard day. And
Her little koala bear class pet on the ground. She goes,
a lot of people like Jen use their social media accounts to savor good things that are happening in their classroom. And believe it or not, there are actually 9 research-based strategies for savoring. And Jen used several of them, including the first one listed here, which is sharing with others. An example of self-congratulating, one of my clients, when she like nails a lesson, literally has a victory dance, like a football player, that she does in front of her kids. And that is how she really savors those rare victories. And so we're going to put another question into the chat. Like, what are the moments that energize you? And which strategies can you use to help savor them? And the example is Jen's example, which is kids say something hilarious and you find a way to share it with others. So let's see, what are some of your tricks of the trade? Routine joke time. I like that. So that sounds like memory building to me. And maybe temporal awareness, like knowing like, this is Monday. This is our one time of the week to have jokes. Good. Allie's example of memory building by sharing wins with other people. Taking lots of photos, memory building that way. Talking about the wins. Ooh, those come see moments. I like that language. Yeah, a light bulb moment. Sharing with parents. Wonderful. So sort of like we're seeing in the chat, the number one savoring strategy is sharing with others and capitalizing on the positive with other people. Yeah. Counting blessings, Felicia. Okay. Wonderful. Shouting out other people. So prompting other people to savor. Okay. You can tell we got some experience in this crew. Okay. So, a lot of us, when we are not savoring something and we are feeling the symptom of emotional exhaustion, we do things like snap at our husbands or turn down a chance to hang out with friends or overeat caloric foods and overdrink alcohol. Those moments are then often followed by feelings of shame. So thinking, now I'm weak, or I'm not good enough, or everyone else seems to be avoiding these types of behaviors. And so we're going to put a poll up for you to do right now. It should take about a minute. And this will be anonymous, but what are some of the private thoughts that go through your mind when you are in a moment of struggle? So you should see a poll pop up. And you can choose as many as you want. Okay, it looks about half of you have voted, so we'll give another minute to answer this. Okay, once we get to 80%, we're going to end this poll. We're almost there. Okay, Jen, do you want to do the honors of ending this poll? Okay, so this is consistent with the research that I am about to share. If you notice that the top 3 options were the most popular. Okay. I'm going to take this away in a second. Okay, wonderful. So we're going to close this out. And what I was doing with you is a scale that was developed around self-compassion. And when clients really struggle with struggle, right? They struggle to struggle. I rely on the self-compassion research from Kristen Neff. And the word passion means suffer. Word calm means with. So self-compassion means to suffer with yourself. And the most popular responses that y'all chose are 3 responses to struggle that are non-examples of self-compassion. So they are self-judgment, feelings of isolation, and then also over-identifying with that moment. And self-compassion is mindfully acknowledging that you're suffering, but without exaggerating it. And then recognizing that that struggle is part of life. And then talking to yourself like you would a close, respected friend. So it might sound like, right now I'm really struggling. And teachers who I look up to struggle with this also. And what would I say to a friend who texted me and told me that they were struggling with this in their classroom? And, for some of you, including me, self-compassion is hard and not very common. And you are not alone in that. So I'm going to read a quote from Kristen Neff, who's the lead researcher on this. So about 75% of people are significantly kinder to others than they are to themselves. Most people tend to relate to themselves with harsh judgment when things are going poorly. Typically, our response is to criticize ourselves, especially if our pain comes from feeling inadequate and a failure or a mistake that we've made. Okay. And the third topic that we are going to go over is the third symptom of burnout is low self-efficacy. So a low self-efficacy moment that I often hear from teachers is, I'm not patient enough to do this. I'm not funny enough to build a relationship with the student. I'm not hardworking enough for this profession or for this task. And if you recall the definition from before, a moment of low self-efficacy is thinking it can be done, but not by me. Okay. And my research helped me dispel this myth that I really held on to that teachers like Sarah Brown Westling or Justin Minkle are free of self-doubt, right? But in fact, even the most experienced educators in our profession have moments of low self-efficacy on a daily basis. And when I work with clients on their sense of self-efficacy, we think about what are the moments that trigger you or that cause you to really feel a low sense of self-efficacy. And then I reference the research on strengths. And positive psychology, instead of trying to document mental illness and pathology, has been looking at how can we document mental strengths in a arguably universal way. And so this is a list of 24 strengths. And our strengths are what we like to give, what we like to receive, and also as educators, what we like to cultivate in others. And I'm going to ask you in a moment, give you some time to look at this list and think about your own strengths. But I'll give an example for myself. So when I took this test, which is available for free online, my 24th out of 24 strength was humor. So I am not funny. You've by now noticed this in this presentation. I don't use humor to teach, to build relationships, or to manage anxiety. You know, when I'm hanging out and choosing a movie on Netflix, I don't usually choose comedy. I like period dramas. And I rarely make people laugh, as again, you've probably experienced already. But one of my top strengths is judgment. And judgment is weighing evidence, being open-minded, trying to come to a conclusion. And here's a picture from my second year of teaching. These are fourth graders, and each morning I would share with my students what was going on in the world as a way to model and teach judgment. Oh, thank you, Lauren. So Lauren, I know humor is one of her top strengths, and she also does comedy. So it makes her number one. So it makes sense that she would find humor in me, but that says more about her than me. Okay, so let's take a look at this list. And most of you haven't taken this assessment. But what do you imagine is one of your top strengths? And how do you incorporate it into your teaching practice? And how does it really come alive for you? So choose a top strength from this list and then think about how do you use it in your classroom? And I chose judgment and then posting current events. And I'll give us a couple of minutes to do this because it's a great thing to think about. Okay, I'm going to read some of these. And what is so cool is how varied they are. So Miss Kirk said transcendence, being optimistic about positive movement and growth and celebrating successes. Lauren uses humor or playing short games, celebrating with silliness and dressing up. Modeling wisdom and humanity, showing your work ethic in your teaching. I love that. Zest, greeting each kid with a high five every day. Making learning fun and enjoyable from Megan. Perspective, so stepping back and seeing the big picture and not getting caught up in the weeds from Brian. Self-regulation, so from Felicia, modeling boundaries, routines. And I like Felicia's language is model, right? So the research on this, on strengths, is that one of the best ways to teach these strengths is through modeling. If you're a social referent in the kids' lives and in your colleagues' lives, which, you know, strong teachers, of course, are. These are incredible. And another piece from this research is that typically when teachers are starting to work in a school, and especially at the beginning of their career, they're very focused on meeting the prescribed expectation. So what is my principal's vision? What do I need to do to be green in the tracker? You know, are my kids walking silently in the hallway? Am I getting 100%? And accomplishing that brings a great sense of self-efficacy. But over time, high performers get their sense of self-efficacy from meeting the expectation, but their own way. And so for Jen, that no doubt includes using a lot of creativity in the way that she presents material and uses technology. For Lauren and a lot of you, that's using humor. I might teach just as well as each of you, but my kids won't be laughing, you know, because that's not the way that I, you know, that's not one of my top strengths that I'm modeling. And getting to a point where you are okay with that, and also getting to a point where you feel like you're really able to live your strengths in your classroom brings enormous self-efficacy. And so if we go back to the teachers that I brought up before, our strengths are what give us a sense of self-efficacy and sort of becomes your brand. And just from observing these educators over the last 10 years, like I can name what one of their top strengths is. And anybody who knows, for example, Danielle uses a lot of humor. And I know, because I'm a friend of hers, that those are the moments that bring her a sense of self-efficacy. So just to recap what we've talked about today, I hope we were able to normalize the experience of burnout and talk about research-informed ways to cultivate the opposite. So optimism, energy, high self-efficacy, and what we call a burn-in mindset. And what I hope you took from this is that even expert teachers experience burnout on a daily basis and stay engaged in this work and in their lives because they work their asses off to intentionally cultivate the opposite. And if you are interested in this type of research and this type of coaching, please go to my website, burninmindset.com, and Jen just put the link in the chat. And if you share that you were with the InStoic conference, you can set up a 30-minute consultation for free to learn more about this content and have a space to reflect on how you are staying burned in throughout this year. And one of the last things that I want to share is just provide some context. So you see on this graph a visual of the research on post-traumatic growth. And I have spent the last 45 minutes talking about individual psychological strategies to combat burnout. But I also want to name that this pandemic has and continues to have a traumatic impact on our profession, our communities, our day-to-day experience, and we are still in it. And so even on our journey towards growth, it is to be expected that many of us are experiencing lowered levels of functioning. And so given the complexity of our reality and the specific content that I reviewed today, let's take a minute to put into the chat, what is one thing that you want to recommit to cultivating this year, either something that you took from the strategies that I shared or from listening to your colleagues in the chat. And we'll take about a minute to do this. And thank you all for participating and being so engaged in this, especially with the chat. People like savoring. Okay, good. Talking to yourself like you would a colleague. Creating routines. Enjoy the good moments. Yeah. Yeah, Christina brings up a good point. Like a lot of us, all of us have coping strategies, and it can sometimes be really helpful to know like, oh, what I do is what someone researches. It's really validating. Okay, thank you all. I'm going to close with a quote that might, and it can be a little bit emotional. But let me read this, which is a quote from Rabbi Harold Kushner, whose son Aaron died suddenly. And here, and young, and here are his reflections. So I'm a more sensitive person, a more effective pastor, a more sympathetic counselor because of Aaron's life and death than I would ever have been without it. And I would give up all of those gains in a second if I could have my son back. If I could choose, I would forego all of the spiritual growth and depth which has come my way because of our experiences, and be what I was 15 years ago, an average rabbi, an indifferent counselor, helping some people and unable to help others, and the father of a bright, happy little boy. But I cannot choose. So Jen, I think we're exactly at time, but if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Jen just put my information in the chat. Thank you so much for all that you're doing and for attending this session. And I really hope to hear from some of you. And I wish you all the ability to manage the burnout symptoms and to model burn-in for yourself and your students. Okay, and there's a note from Lauren saying to please join us back on the main page at 3 p.m.